Captain Sarah Viper Martinez gripped the cyclic stick of her AH-64D Apache longbow attack helicopter as the desert wind whipped across the tarmac at forward operating Base Thunder in Afghanistan. The morning sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and amber, but Sarah's mind was focused on the mission briefing she'd just received. Intelligence reports indicated a high-value Taliban commander was moving through a narrow valley approximately 40 kilometers northeast of their position. At 28 years old, Sarah had already earned a reputation as one of the most skilled Apache pilots in the 1st Battalion, 25th Aviation Regiment. Her call sign, Viper, came not from any aggressive tendencies, but from her precision and deadly accuracy with the Apache's weapon systems. She could thread a Hellfire missile through a window from 3 miles away, and her ability to read terrain and anticipate enemy movements had saved countless ground troops during her 18-month deployment. The briefing had been routine until Colonel Patterson mentioned the additional assets assigned to the mission. 2 F-16 Fighting Falcons from the 455th Air Expeditionary Wing would provide top cover and additional firepower if needed. Sarah raised an eyebrow at this information. Apache helicopters typically operated independently or with ground support coordination. Fighter jet backup was unusual for what should be a straightforward reconnaissance and potential strike mission. "Sir, is there something special about this target that requires fighter support?" Sarah had asked during the briefing. Colonel Patterson's expression remained neutral, but Sarah caught a slight hesitation before he responded. "The area has shown increased anti-aircraft activity recently. We want to ensure you have all possible support available." Sarah's co-pilot and weapons systems officer, Chief Warrant Officer Marcus Tank Rodriguez, had been flying with her for 8 months. Tank was a veteran with over 15 years of experience in various aircraft, and his expertise with the Apache's sophisticated target acquisition and designation system made him one of the most sought-after weapons officers in the unit. He shared Sarah's puzzlement about the fighter escort. "Seems like overkill for a single HVT pickup," Tank muttered as they walked toward their aircraft after the briefing. "Maybe they know something we don't," Sarah replied, though her instincts told her there was more to this mission than the brass was sharing. The Apache Desert Hawk sat gleaming in the morning sun, its 4-blade main rotor and distinctive tandem cockpit design making it one of the most recognizable aircraft in the military inventory. Sarah conducted her pre-flight inspection with methodical precision, checking everything from the 30 mm 230 chain gun mounted beneath the aircraft's nose to the Hellfire missiles mounted on the stubwing pylons. As she completed her external inspection, Sarah noticed 2 F-16s taxiing toward the runway. The lead aircraft bore the call sign Raptor 1 and was piloted by Major Jake "Hammer" Wilson, a veteran fighter pilot with over 2,000 flight hours and multiple combat deployments. His wingman, Captain Tommy Blade Stevens, was newer to combat operations but had graduated at the top of his fighter pilot training class. Sarah had encountered Major Wilson briefly in the officers' club several weeks earlier. The meeting had been cordial but cool. Wilson had made some offhand comments about helicopter pilots being slow and steady compared to the real pilots who flew jets. Sarah had simply smiled and changed the subject, but she remembered the arrogant tone in his voice. Tank climbed into the front cockpit, while Sarah settled into the pilot's seat in the rear cockpit. The Apache's tandem seating arrangement put the pilot higher and behind the weapons officer, providing optimal visibility for both crew members. Sarah began the startup sequence, listening to the familiar whine of the twin General Electric T700 turboshaft engines coming to life. "Desert Hawk, this is tower control. You are cleared for takeoff on heading 045. Winds are calm, visibility unlimited. Raptor flight will depart in 5 minutes and establish contact on tactical frequency. Tower control, Desert Hawk copies, departing on heading 045. Sarah pulled pitch on the collective and felt the Apache lift smoothly from the tarmac. The sensation of flight never got old, especially in the Apache with its incredible maneuverability and responsiveness. She transitioned from hover to forward flight and began climbing toward their assigned altitude of 5,000 feet above ground level. The landscape below was typical of eastern Afghanistan: rugged mountains, narrow valleys, scattered villages, and vast areas of seemingly empty desert. Sarah knew that the apparent emptiness was deceiving. Taliban fighters were masters of concealment and could appear from seemingly barren terrain without warning. 20 minutes into the flight, The F-16s checked in on the tactical frequency. Major Wilson's voice crackled through Sarah's headphones with the crisp, professional tone typical of fighter pilots. Desert Hawk, this is Raptor 1. We have you on radar bearing 065 at Angels 5. We're establishing orbit at Angels 15. Raptor 1, Desert Hawk copies. We're proceeding to target area for initial reconnaissance. Sarah guided the Apache through a series of mountain passes, using the terrain to mask their approach to the target valley. The Apache's mast-mounted radar dome allowed them to peek over ridgelines without exposing the entire aircraft, a technique that had proven invaluable in combat operations. As they approached the target area, Tank began scanning with the aircraft's target acquisition and designation sight system. The day-night thermal imaging system could detect heat signatures and movement patterns that would be invisible to the naked eye. The target valley was approximately 10 kilometers long and varied in width from 200 meters to nearly a kilometer. "I've got movement in the valley," Tank reported. "Multiple heat signatures, looks like vehicles and personnel, range approximately 6,000 meters." Sarah maneuvered the Apache to a position behind a ridgeline that would allow them to observe the target area while remaining concealed. The sophistication of the Apache's sensors meant they could conduct detailed reconnaissance from significant distances, well beyond the range of most small arms and rocket-propelled grenades. Raptor 1, Desert Hawk. We have positive identification of multiple targets in the objective area, requesting permission to move closer for detailed assessment. Desert Hawk, Raptor 1. Be advised, we're picking up electronic emissions consistent with surface-to-air missile systems in your vicinity. Recommend maintaining current distance. Sarah frowned. Her threat warning systems showed no indication of radar locks or missile guidance systems. The Apache's defensive systems were sophisticated and highly sensitive. If there were SAM sites in the area, she should be detecting them. Raptor 1, our threat systems are clean. No indication of SAM activity. Desert Hawk, our sensors are showing definite SAM signatures. Recommend you abort reconnaissance and return to base. Tank looked back at Sarah with a puzzled expression. As the weapons systems officer, he was responsible for monitoring all threat detection systems, and his displays showed the same clean readings that Sarah was seeing. "Sarah, I'm not seeing any threats on our systems," he said over the intercom. "Everything's showing green." Sarah's instincts, honed by hundreds of combat flight hours, told her something was wrong. The fighter pilots were either seeing something her systems couldn't detect, or there was another explanation for their warnings. She decided to investigate further. "Tank, bring up the targeting system, and let's get a closer look at whatever's in that valley." The Apache's TADS system zoomed in on the valley floor, revealing a convoy of vehicles moving slowly along a dirt road. Through the thermal imaging, Sarah could see the heat signatures of multiple personnel around the vehicles. The convoy matched the intelligence description of the target they were supposed to locate. Raptor 1, we have visual confirmation of the target convoy, beginning detailed assessment for potential engagement. Negative, Desert Hawk. You are ordered to withdraw immediately. Return to base. Sarah was stunned. The order to withdraw came with no explanation and contradicted their mission briefing. They had been specifically tasked with locating and, if possible, engaging the target convoy. Now, with the targets clearly in sight, they were being ordered to abort. Raptor 1, please confirm. Are you ordering mission abort? Affirmative, Desert Hawk. Mission abort. Return to base immediately. Tank, something's not right here, Sarah said over the intercom. Our sensors are clean, we have positive target identification, and now they want us to abort for no clear reason. Tank nodded in agreement. His experience told him the same thing Sarah was feeling. The situation didn't make sense from a tactical perspective. Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Instead of immediately departing the area, she decided to conduct one more reconnaissance pass to gather as much intelligence as possible about the convoy. If they were going to abort the mission, at least they could provide detailed information for future operations. Tank, I'm going to make one quick pass for detailed photos and intelligence. Something about this whole situation stinks. Roger that. I'll keep the sensors running and document everything we see. Sarah dropped the Apache lower and began a careful approach toward the valley, using terrain features to mask their movement. The Apache's quiet operation and low profile made it difficult to detect when flown skillfully. As they moved closer to the target, Tank's threat warning systems suddenly came alive with multiple alarms. "Sarah, we've got multiple radar locks, surface-to-air missiles." The Apache's defensive systems displayed a threat picture showing at least 3 separate missile guidance radars painting their aircraft. The locations of the threats didn't match what the F-16s had reported earlier. "Raptor 1, Desert Hawk, we have multiple SAM locks, need immediate support." Instead of the expected response offering assistance, Major Wilson's voice came back with a tone that sent chills down Sarah's spine. "Desert Hawk, you were ordered to withdraw. You chose to ignore those orders." Before Sarah could respond, her radar warning receiver exploded with new alarms. The distinctive tone indicating air-to-air missile guidance radar filled her headphones. "Tank, that's not SAM radar. Those are air-to-air locks. The F-16s are targeting us." The realization hit both crew members simultaneously. This wasn't a routine reconnaissance mission that had gone wrong. They had been set up. The target convoy was apparently supposed to pass through the valley unmolested, and Sarah and Tank had stumbled into something they weren't supposed to see. "Raptor 1, what are you doing? We're friendly aircraft." "Desert Hawk, you have been designated hostile. You will be engaged if you do not immediately depart the area." Sarah's mind raced through the implications. If the F-16s engaged them with missiles, the Apache would have virtually no chance of survival. The fighter jets held every advantage in speed, altitude, and firepower. But Sarah hadn't survived 18 months of combat by giving up when the odds were against her. "Tank, prepare defensive systems. If they want to fight, we'll give them one they won't expect." The Apache might be outgunned by the F-16s, but Sarah knew something the fighter pilots didn't. She knew this terrain intimately, and she knew the Apache's capabilities in ways that most people never imagined. What happened next would determine whether they survived to expose whatever conspiracy they had uncovered or became another casualty statistic in an increasingly complex war. The morning sun climbed higher over the Afghan mountains as 2 F-16 Fighting Falcons prepared to engage a single Apache helicopter. On paper, it should have been no contest. But paper doesn't account for skill, determination, or the fierce protective instincts of a pilot who knows she's fighting for more than just survival. Sarah Viper Martinez was about to show 2 cocky fighter pilots why she had earned her call sign, and why underestimating an Apache pilot could be the last mistake they ever made. The mountains would soon echo with the sound of her laughter as the hunters became the hunted in a deadly game of cat and mouse among the peaks of Afghanistan. The dance was about to begin, and Sarah Martinez intended to be the last one standing when the music stopped. The first AIM-120 AMRAAM missile streaked through the morning sky like a deadly silver arrow, its advanced guidance system locked onto the Apache's heat signature. Sarah Martinez had perhaps 15 seconds before impact, but those 15 seconds might as well have been a lifetime for a pilot of her caliber. "Missile inbound," Tank shouted over the intercom, his voice tight but controlled. "Range 4 miles and closing fast." Sarah didn't hesitate. She threw the Apache into a violent diving turn toward a narrow canyon she had spotted during their approach. The helicopter's agility, often overlooked by fixed-wing pilots who saw only the slower speeds, became her salvation. The Apache could change direction and altitude in ways that would tear apart a fighter jet. "Deploying chaff and flares," Tank called out as he triggered the defensive countermeasures. Clouds of metallic strips and burning flares erupted from the Apache, creating false targets to confuse the incoming missile's guidance system. The canyon walls rose up around them like protective stone arms as Sarah dove the Apache below the ridgeline. The AMRAAM, designed to engage targets in open sky, lost its lock as the Apache disappeared into the radar shadow of the mountains. The missile streaked harmlessly overhead, its sophisticated seeker head confused by the sudden disappearance of its target. "Raptor 1, how did you miss a slow-moving helicopter?" came the voice of Captain Stevens from Raptor 2, his tone mixing surprise with derision. "Shut up, Blade, that was just lucky. They won't get away again," Major Wilson replied, his voice tight with anger and embarrassment. Sarah was already planning her next move as she guided the Apache through the narrow canyon at high speed, the rotor blades churning the air just meters from the rocky walls. Tank's head was on a swivel, watching for threats, and looking for opportunities to turn the tables on their attackers. "Sarah, I've got an idea," Tank said, his voice carrying the calm confidence that came from years of experience in life-or-death situations. "These canyon walls are going to limit their attack angles. If we can draw them down lower, we might be able to even the odds." "What are you thinking?" Sarah asked as she navigated a sharp turn in the canyon. "The Apaches got one major advantage they're not thinking about. We can stop and hover. They can't. If we can get them committed to an attack run in this terrain, their speed becomes a liability instead of an asset." Sarah smiled grimly. Tank was right. Fighter pilots were trained to think in terms of speed and altitude advantages. They were accustomed to engaging targets that played by the same rules they did. The Apache operated under completely different physics. "Raptor flight, this is Raptor 1. Target has gone to ground in the canyon system. We're going down to flush them out." Sarah heard the transmission on the emergency frequency and knew the F-16s were about to make their first serious mistake. Canyon flying in fighter jets required extreme skill and complete concentration. It also eliminated most of their technological advantages. "Tank, get ready with the 30. If they come down into these canyons, we're going to introduce them to the business end of our chain gun." The Apache's M230 chain gun was a devastating weapon system capable of firing 625 rounds per minute of 30, high-explosive dual-purpose ammunition. While the F-16s had speed and missiles, the Apache had the ability to bring precise, devastating firepower to bear in close-quarters combat. Sarah guided the Apache around another bend in the canyon and suddenly pulled into a hover behind a large rock formation. The helicopter disappeared from view, hidden in the radar shadow of the stone outcropping. She could hear the sound of jet engines echoing off the canyon walls as the F-16s began their descent. "Contact, I see the helicopter," Captain Stevens called out as Raptor 2 dove into the canyon system. "It's hovering behind rocks at coordinates." His transmission was cut short as Sarah popped the Apache up from behind the rocks, and Tank opened fire with the chain gun. The stream of 30 rounds reached out like a deadly finger, the high-explosive shells sparking against the canyon walls as Captain Stevens threw his F-16 into a desperate evasive maneuver. "Jesus, they're shooting at us," Stevens yelled, his previous confidence completely evaporated. "Of course they're shooting, you idiot. They're trying to kill us," Major Wilson replied. Break left, break left." But the narrow confines of the canyon made evasive maneuvering extremely difficult for the fighter jets. Captain Stevens pulled his F-16 into a climbing turn, but the canyon walls limited his options. Sarah was already repositioning the Apache, using its ability to hover and maneuver in tight spaces to maintain a tactical advantage. "Tank, did you see that? He nearly flew into the canyon wall trying to avoid our fire." "Roger that. These guys are way out of their element down here. They're used to fighting in open sky where they can use their speed and climb rate. Down here, they're just fast targets." Sarah moved the Apache to another concealed position and waited. The sound of jet engines grew louder as Major Wilson brought Raptor 1 through the canyon, searching for their target. The F-16 appeared around a bend, flying fast and low, its pilot's attention focused on trying to locate the Apache. "There," Tank called out. "Raptor 1, 11 o'clock low." Sarah brought the Apache around the rock formation, and Tank engaged with the chain gun. This time, several rounds found their mark on Raptor 1's right wing. Major Wilson felt the impacts through his aircraft's structure and saw warning lights illuminate his cockpit display. "Raptor 1 taking hits. I've got damage to the right wing and hydraulic system warnings." The F-16 limped away from the canyon, climbing rapidly to gain altitude and assess the damage. Sarah's laugh echoed through the radio as she keyed her microphone. "Raptor 1, this is Desert Hawk. How does it feel to be outmaneuvered by a slow and steady helicopter pilot?" Major Wilson's face burned with embarrassment and rage. He had just been damaged by a helicopter armed with nothing more than a cannon. The thought that word of this engagement might get back to his squadron filled him with dread. Fighter pilots had a culture that prized technological superiority and overwhelming firepower. Being bested in combat by a helicopter would be a humiliation that could end his career. "Raptor 2, this is Raptor 1. We're going to finish this right now. I want you to fire a missile into that canyon. Doesn't matter if you can see the target or not. Just fill that space with explosives." Captain Stevens hesitated. Firing missiles without positive target identification violated multiple rules of engagement. But Major Wilson was the flight leader, and Stevens was not in a position to question orders in the middle of combat. Roger, Raptor 1, firing AIM-9 Sidewinder into the canyon. The heat-seeking missile streaked down into the narrow canyon, its infrared seeker head hunting for the Apache's heat signature. But Sarah had anticipated this possibility. As soon as she heard the missile launch call, she moved the Apache behind a large rock formation and shut down one engine, reducing her heat signature dramatically. The Sidewinder, confused by the echoing heat reflections off the canyon walls and unable to lock onto a clear target, detonated against the canyon wall in a massive explosion of rock and debris. The blast sent boulders tumbling down into the canyon floor, but the Apache remained unharmed in its concealed position. Raptor 1, this is Raptor 2. Missile impact, no observed effect on target. Sarah's laughter came over the radio again, clear and confident. Gentlemen, you just wasted a $60,000 missile on some rocks. I hope you're better at paperwork than you are at flying, because you're going to have a lot of forms to fill out. Major Wilson was beyond rational thought now. The combination of embarrassment, anger, and the very real possibility that his career was about to be ruined drove him to make increasingly desperate decisions. Raptor 2, we're going to flush them out with multiple missile strikes. Fire everything you have into that canyon system. Sir, that's going to be danger close to our own position, and we still don't have positive target identification. I don't care, fire the missiles. What Major Wilson didn't know was that Sarah had been monitoring their radio communications and had a complete picture of their tactical situation. While the F-16 pilots were focused on trying to destroy the Apache in the canyon, Sarah had been planning her next move. Tank, how long until those missiles reach us if they fire from their current position? Tank was already calculating firing solutions and flight times. Approximately 45 seconds from launch to impact, assuming they're firing from altitude. Perfect, that gives us just enough time. Sarah had spotted something during their maneuvering that the F-16 pilots hadn't noticed. The canyon system they were fighting in connected to a larger valley system that would allow the Apache to emerge behind the fighter jet's current position. If she could time it correctly, she could turn the engagement completely around. Tank, hold on, we're going to thread the needle. Sarah dropped the Apache down to just a few meters above the canyon floor and began a high-speed transit through the narrowest part of the canyon system. The Apache's rotor blades came within inches of the canyon walls as she navigated by pure instinct and skill, using every bit of the helicopter's maneuverability. Behind them, Captain Stevens launched 2 more AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles into the canyon where they thought the Apache was hiding. The missiles impacted against the canyon walls in spectacular explosions, sending up clouds of dust and debris that obscured visibility throughout the area. Multiple impacts, Stevens called out. Target area is completely obscured by dust and smoke. Outstanding, Major Wilson replied. No way anything could survive that barrage. Let's circle around and confirm the kill. But as the dust began to settle, the Apache was nowhere to be seen in the canyon. Major Wilson felt a cold chill as he realized what might have happened. Raptor 2, do you have eyes on the target? Negative, Raptor 1. I don't see anything in the canyon. Then where the hell is it? Sarah's voice came over the radio, calm and amused. Looking for someone, gentlemen. Both F-16 pilots spun their aircraft around, searching frantically for the Apache. Their radar systems, designed primarily for air-to-air combat against high-flying targets, were having difficulty picking up the low-flying helicopter against the ground clutter of the mountainous terrain. This is impossible, Major Wilson muttered. Where did they go? The answer came in the form of 30 chain gun fire that raked across Raptor 2's fuselage from below and behind. Sarah had emerged from the canyon system at exactly the right moment, positioning the Apache perfectly for an attack on the unsuspecting fighter jet. Raptor 2 is hit. I repeat, Raptor 2 is hit. Captain Stevens called out in panic as warning lights illuminated his cockpit and his aircraft began to lose power. Brake right, Major Wilson yelled, but it was too late. Tank's accuracy with the chain gun was legendary throughout the regiment, and he proved why by placing a precise burst of 30 rounds into Raptor 2's engine compartment. The F-16's single engine began to fail catastrophically, sending the fighter jet into an uncontrolled descent. "Mayday, mayday, Raptor 2 declaring an emergency, engine failure, I'm going down." Sarah watched as Captain Stevens ejected from his crippled F-16, his parachute blossoming against the blue morning sky. The fighter jet crashed into a barren mountainside in a spectacular explosion of jet fuel and twisted metal. "Raptor 1, this is Desert Hawk. Your wingman is down. Do you want to continue this fight, or would you prefer to join him?" Major Wilson found himself alone, facing an Apache helicopter pilot who had just demonstrated capabilities he had never imagined possible. His aircraft had sustained damage from the earlier engagement, his wingman was shot down, and he was rapidly running out of ammunition and options. But pride and desperation drove him to make one final attempt. If he could destroy the Apache, he might still be able to salvage something from this disaster. The alternative was returning to base with a story that no one would believe and a career that would be effectively over. "This isn't finished," he transmitted grimly. Sarah's reply carried the confidence of someone who knew exactly how this was going to end. "Major Wilson, it's been finished since the moment you decided to threaten an Apache pilot in her own territory. You just haven't figured it out yet." Major Jake Wilson circled high above the Afghan mountains, his damaged F-16 struggling to maintain altitude as hydraulic fluid leaked from the wounded aircraft. Below him, the Apache helicopter had vanished once again into the maze of canyons and ridgelines, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the growing realization that he had severely underestimated his opponent. Wilson's hands trembled slightly on the flight controls, not from fear but from the adrenaline and shock of seeing his wingman shot down by a helicopter. In all his years of fighter pilot training and combat experience, he had never encountered a situation like this. Helicopters were supposed to be easy targets for fighter jets. They were slow, low-flying, and vulnerable. What was happening here defied everything he thought he knew about aerial combat. "Raptor 1, this is Crown Control. We're showing Raptor 2 as down. What is your status?" The voice of the air traffic controller back at base brought Wilson back to the immediate situation. He had to make a decision: break off the engagement and return to base, or continue hunting the Apache that had just humiliated him and destroyed his wingman. "Crown Control, Raptor 1. Raptor 2 is down due to ground fire. I am continuing the mission." "Roger, Raptor 1. Be advised we're showing your aircraft with possible damage. Recommend you return to base for assessment." Wilson looked at his instrument panel. Multiple warning lights glowed amber and red, indicating hydraulic problems, fuel leaks, and damage to his flight control systems. The Apache's 30 chain gun had done more damage than he initially realized. His aircraft was still flyable, but it was operating at reduced capability. "Negative, Crown Control. I can complete the mission with current aircraft status." What Wilson didn't tell the controller was that he couldn't return to base without completing the mission. The original plan had been simple: eliminate the Apache crew that had witnessed something they weren't supposed to see, then return with a story about a successful engagement against Taliban forces. Now, with his wingman down and his own aircraft damaged, Wilson faced the prospect of explaining how 2 F-16s had been defeated by a single helicopter. Down in the canyon system, Sarah Martinez was using the Apache's superior maneuverability and her intimate knowledge of the terrain to plan her next move. She had drawn the fighter jets into a type of combat they weren't prepared for, but she knew the engagement was far from over. Major Wilson was still up there, and desperation made people dangerous. "Tank, what's our fuel status?" "We've got about 90 minutes of fuel remaining at current consumption rates," Tank replied, monitoring the aircraft systems. "More than enough to finish this fight and get home." "Good, Wilson's going to come back, and when he does, I want to be ready for him." Sarah had been thinking about the tactical situation throughout the engagement. The F-16s held advantages in speed, altitude, and missile range, but those advantages came with limitations. Fighter jets needed room to maneuver, time to set up attacks, and clear lines of sight to their targets. The mountainous terrain of Afghanistan negated most of those advantages, especially for pilots who weren't accustomed to low-level combat. "I've been monitoring his radio transmissions," Tank said. "He's not reporting the real situation back to base. He's going to try to finish this himself rather than call for backup. That works in our favor. The last thing we need is more fighters showing up. Sarah guided the Apache through another narrow canyon, always moving, always changing position. Staying stationary was death in combat. Movement created uncertainty for the enemy and opportunities for herself. As they emerged from the canyon into a broader valley, Tank's threat warning systems activated again. Sarah, we've got radar contact. Single aircraft, high altitude, approximately 8 miles northeast. That's our friend Wilson coming back for round 2. Sarah climbed the Apache to a higher altitude, using a ridge line for cover while Tank scanned the skis with the aircraft's targeting systems. The Apache's mast-mounted radar gave them the ability to detect threats while remaining largely concealed behind terrain features. Contact, F-16 at 12 o'clock high, range 6 miles and closing. Major Wilson had decided on a different approach for this attack. Instead of diving into the canyons where the Apache held the advantage, he would use his aircraft's superior altitude and speed to conduct high-speed attack runs from above. The Apache might be maneuverable, but it couldn't outrun missiles fired from optimal range. Desert Hawk, this is Raptor 1. You got lucky before, but your luck just ran out. Sarah's response was characteristically calm and confident. Major Wilson, you've already lost 1 aircraft and damaged your own. Are you sure you want to continue this? I'm going to finish what I started. Wilson put his F-16 into a steep dive, building speed as he lined up for a missile shot. The Apache appeared on his targeting display as a small green symbol against the brown backdrop of the desert mountains. At this range and speed, there should be no way for the helicopter to evade his missiles. But Sarah had no intention of trying to outrun the F-16's missiles. Instead, she was going to use the one advantage the Apache possessed that Wilson hadn't accounted for: the ability to hide in plain sight. Tank, remember that training exercise we did in Colorado? The one where we had to evade F-15s in mountain terrain. You mean the one where we made those Eagle drivers look like rookies? Yeah, I remember. Same technique, but this time it's not an exercise. Sarah dropped the Apache down into a narrow valley between 2 ridgelines, flying at extremely low altitude and high speed. From above, the helicopter would be virtually impossible to see against the rocky terrain, especially for a pilot moving at several hundred miles per hour. Wilson's first AIM-120 missile streaked down into the valley where his radar showed the Apache. But when the missile's seeker head activated, it found only empty space and rocky ground. The advanced guidance system, confused by the lack of a clear target, detonated harmlessly against a mountainside. Missile miss, target is not where radar indicated. Wilson pulled his F-16 out of its dive and climbed back to altitude, scanning frantically for the Apache. His aircraft's radar system was designed for high-altitude intercepts against large, fast-moving targets. Trying to track a low-flying helicopter in mountainous terrain was pushing the system beyond its intended capabilities. "Where are you?" Wilson muttered, adjusting his radar settings and search patterns. The answer came from directly below him as Sarah popped the Apache up from behind a ridge line, and Tank engaged with the 30 chain gun. The burst of cannon fire reached up toward the F-16 like a deadly string of pearls, forcing Wilson into violent evasive maneuvers that stressed his already damaged aircraft. Contact below, taking fire. Wilson threw his fighter into a climbing turn, but the sudden G-forces and stress on the damaged hydraulic system caused new warning lights to illuminate his cockpit. His aircraft was slowly falling apart around him, and he was running out of time and options. Sarah's laughter echoed over the radio again, a sound that had become Wilson's personal nightmare. "Major Wilson, your aircraft is leaking hydraulic fluid like a sieve. Every time you pull high GS, you're making the damage worse. Why don't you just head home before you have to eject like your wingman?" The taunt pushed Wilson over the edge. All rational thought disappeared, replaced by blind rage and the desperate need to salvage his pride and career. He rolled the F-16 inverted and dove straight down at the Apache, his remaining AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles armed and ready. "I'm going to ram that helicopter if I have to." But Sarah had anticipated this possibility. Desperate pilots made predictable decisions, and Wilson was about as desperate as they came. She waited until the F-16 was committed to its dive, then executed a maneuver that used the Apache's unique capabilities to devastating effect. As Wilson dove toward her position, Sarah suddenly pulled the Apache into a tight hover directly over a narrow canyon opening. To Wilson, screaming downward at over 400 miles per hour, it looked like the helicopter had simply vanished. Where did it go? Where did it go? Wilson's F-16 flashed past the canyon opening at tremendous speed, its pilot unable to see the Apache hovering just beneath the rim of the canyon. But Tank had a perfect firing solution on the fighter jet as it passed overhead. The 30 chain gun roared to life, sending a stream of high-explosive rounds into the F-16's tail section. The impacts were devastating at such close range, shredding the aircraft's control surfaces and severing hydraulic lines. Raptor 1 is hit, multiple systems failing, flight controls not responding. Wilson fought desperately to control his crippled aircraft as it went into an uncontrolled spin. The F-16's advanced fly-by-wire flight control system was trying to compensate for the damage, but there were limits to what even the most sophisticated technology could overcome. Ejection sequence initiated, Wilson called out as his aircraft's computer systems determined that the damage was too severe for recovery. The explosive bolts fired, and Wilson's ejection seat rocketed him clear of the disintegrating F-16. His parachute deployed automatically, lowering him toward the rocky terrain below as his aircraft crashed into a mountainside in a spectacular fireball. Sarah brought the Apache around in a gentle turn, watching Wilson's parachute descend toward a relatively flat area near the base of the mountains. Despite everything that had happened, she felt no satisfaction in watching another pilot go down. The engagement had been forced on her, but she took no pleasure in the destruction. Tank marked Wilson's position for search and rescue. Whatever he was involved in, he's still an American pilot. Roger that. GPS coordinates logged and transmitted to Ground Control. As the sound of the Apache's rotors echoed off the canyon walls, Sarah reflected on the morning's events. She had been set up for elimination, but instead had turned the tables on her attackers. 2 F-16 Fighting Falcons lay in smoking ruins on the Afghan mountainside, their pilots parachuted down but alive. Ground Control, this is Desert Hawk. Be advised, both Raptor aircraft are down, pilots ejected safely. We have GPS coordinates for search and rescue operations. Desert Hawk, Ground Control. Did you say both Raptor aircraft are down? Affirmative, Ground Control. Raptor 1 and Raptor 2 are both down due to equipment malfunctions during low-level flight operations. Sarah's report was carefully worded to avoid revealing the true nature of the engagement. She knew that whatever conspiracy had led to this morning's events, it wasn't over. There were still questions to be answered and people to be held accountable. Ground Control, Desert Hawk is RTB with important intelligence information. Request priority landing and immediate debriefing with senior command staff. As the Apache turned toward home, Sarah's mind was already working on the larger picture. Someone had ordered the F-16s to eliminate her and Tank, presumably to cover up whatever they had witnessed in the target valley. The convoy they had been ordered to reconnaissance was apparently so important that people were willing to commit murder to protect it. But Sarah Martinez hadn't survived 18 months of combat in Afghanistan by backing down from a fight. If someone wanted her dead, she was going to find out why, and she was going to make sure they paid the price for threatening her and her crew. The Apache's rotors beat steadily through the mountain air as Sarah headed home, carrying with her the knowledge that this morning's aerial combat was just the beginning of a much larger and more dangerous game. Someone had made the mistake of underestimating an Apache pilot, and now they were going to learn what happened when you backed a Viper into a corner. The laughter that had echoed through the radio during the combat engagement wasn't the sound of amusement. It was the sound of a predator who had just realized she was no longer the prey. The Apache helicopter touched down on the tarmac at forward operating base Thunder with the gentlest of contacts, Sarah Martinez's skilled hands bringing the aircraft to rest as if nothing extraordinary had happened during their mission. But as she began the shutdown sequence, her mind was racing with the implications of the morning's events. 2 F-16 fighter jets lay in wreckage on the Afghan mountainside, their pilots rescued but facing an uncertain future, and somewhere in the chain of command, people were scrambling to explain how a routine reconnaissance mission had turned into a disaster. Tank, before we debrief, I need you to download everything from our mission recorder. Every radio transmission, every radar contact, every targeting solution. I want a complete record of everything that happened out there. Chief Warrant Officer Marcus Rodriguez nodded grimly as he began the process of extracting data from the Apache's sophisticated mission recording systems. Already on it, Sarah. Whatever this is about, we're going to have proof of what really happened. As they completed the post-flight inspection of their aircraft, Sarah noticed Colonel Patterson approaching across the tarmac, his expression unreadable but his body language suggesting extreme tension. Behind him walked two men in civilian clothes, their bearing and demeanor marking them as intelligence operatives even without visible identification. "Captain Martinez, Chief Rodriguez, I need you to come with me immediately for debriefing," Patterson said, his voice carefully neutral but his eyes conveying a warning that Sarah caught immediately. "Yes, sir. We have mission recorder data ready for download and analysis." "That won't be necessary, Captain. This debriefing will cover only essential operational details." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. The mission recorder data was standard procedure after any combat engagement, especially one involving friendly fire incidents. The fact that Patterson was dismissing it suggested that someone wanted to control the narrative of what had happened. As they walked toward the command building, Tank leaned close to Sarah and whispered, "The data card is in my pocket. I palmed it during the download." Sarah nodded almost imperceptibly. Tank's experience and instincts had served them well in combat, and they were serving them well now. Whatever was happening, they would have their own record of the truth. The debriefing room was sterile and windowless, containing only a metal table and several chairs. The two civilian intelligence operatives took seats across from Sarah and Tank, while Colonel Patterson remained standing near the door. The setup felt more like an interrogation than a routine mission debrief. "Captain Martinez, I'm Agent Davidson with the Defense Intelligence Agency," the older of the two civilians said, his voice carrying the flat, emotionless tone of someone accustomed to asking difficult questions. "This is Agent Miller. We need to discuss the events of this morning's mission." "Yes, sir. Chief Rodriguez and I are prepared to provide a complete account of our reconnaissance mission and the subsequent engagement with hostile aircraft." Agent Davidson's eyebrows rose slightly. "Hostile aircraft, Captain? According to our records, you were engaged in a training exercise with friendly F-16s from the 455th Air Expeditionary Wing." Sarah felt the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Someone was already constructing an alternate version of events, one that would paint the morning's aerial combat as a tragic training accident rather than an attempted assassination. "Sir, with respect, that's not accurate. Chief Rodriguez and I were conducting reconnaissance of a target convoy when we were ordered to abort the mission, and subsequently engaged by F-16s that were targeting us with live missiles." Agent Miller spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a hint of skepticism. "Captain, you're suggesting that American fighter pilots deliberately attacked your aircraft. That's a very serious accusation." "It's not an accusation, sir. It's a statement of fact. We have radio recordings and mission data to support our account." "Actually, Captain," Agent Davidson said smoothly, "there seems to be a problem with your mission recording systems. Technical malfunction during the flight. Very unfortunate, but these things happen." Tank started to speak, but Sarah caught his eye and gave him an almost imperceptible shake of her head. If they were going to play this game, she needed to understand the rules first. "I see. And what does the official record show happened during our mission?" Colonel Patterson finally spoke, his voice strained with the effort of delivering what was obviously a prepared statement. "The official record shows that you and Chief Rodriguez were participating in a joint training exercise involving close air support coordination between Apache helicopters and F-16 fighters. During the exercise, a series of equipment malfunctions and communication failures led to a tragic accident in which both F-16s were lost. And the target convoy we were ordered to observe." "There was no target convoy, Captain. The coordinates you were given were for the training area where the exercise was supposed to take place." Sarah realized she was facing a choice that would define the rest of her military career and possibly her life. She could accept the official version of events, keep quiet about what she had really seen, and continue serving as if nothing had happened. Or she could stand up for the truth, knowing that it would likely end her career and might put her and Tank in danger. The decision was easier than she expected. Sir, I respectfully disagree with the official account. Chief Rodriguez and I witnessed events that contradict the training exercise narrative, and I believe we have a duty to report what we actually observed. Agent Davidson's expression hardened. Captain Martinez, you're walking into very dangerous territory. Sometimes what we think we see isn't what actually happened. Stress, confusion, equipment malfunctions, they can all contribute to false memories and misperceptions. Are you suggesting that I'm lying or incompetent? I'm suggesting that you might be mistaken about certain details. It happens to the best of pilots. Tank couldn't remain silent any longer. With respect, sir, Captain Martinez is one of the most skilled and level-headed pilots I've ever flown with. If she says we were deliberately targeted, then that's exactly what happened. Agent Miller leaned forward, his voice taking on a more threatening tone. Chief Rodriguez, I would advise you to be very careful about the accusations you're making. Careers have been ended for less. My career isn't worth covering up attempted murder, Tank replied firmly. The room fell silent for several long moments as the two sides faced off across the metal table. Sarah could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her, but she also felt something else. The same calm confidence that had carried her through hundreds of combat missions. Gentlemen, I think we understand each other, she said finally. You want Chief Rodriguez and me to accept a version of events that we know to be false. You're willing to threaten our careers and possibly our safety to ensure our cooperation. The question is, what are you trying to hide that's worth going to such lengths? Agent Davidson's mask of professional courtesy finally slipped, revealing the calculating intelligence operative beneath. Captain Martinez, there are larger issues at stake here than your personal sense of truth and justice. Sometimes the greater good requires accepting certain ambiguities in the official record. The greater good? 2 pilots tried to murder me and my crew chief this morning. We defended ourselves successfully, and now you want us to pretend it was all an accident. What possible greater good could justify that? The kind that keeps this war from becoming significantly more complicated than it already is. The admission hung in the air like a bomb that had just exploded. Agent Davidson had revealed more than he intended, confirming that the morning's events were connected to something much larger and more dangerous than a simple reconnaissance mission. What was in that convoy? Sarah asked quietly. Captain Martinez, this conversation is over. You and Chief Rodriguez will sign statements accepting the official version of this morning's events, and you will not discuss any alternate theories or accounts with anyone. That's an order. Sarah looked at Tank, seeing her own determination reflected in his eyes. They had survived combat together, faced death together, and now they were facing the most important decision of their lives together. Sir, I respectfully decline to sign any false statements. Chief Rodriguez and I will be filing our own reports detailing the actual events of this morning's mission. Agent Davidson stood up slowly, his expression cold and predatory. Captain Martinez, you're making a serious mistake. There are consequences for refusing to cooperate with national security requirements. Are you threatening me, sir? I'm informing you of the realities of the situation. Accidents happen in combat zones. Equipment failures, pilot error, enemy action, lots of ways for things to go wrong. The threat was clear, but Sarah had faced death in aerial combat just hours earlier. The idea of backing down now when the truth was at stake was simply inconceivable. Agent Davidson, I've been shot at by professionals this morning. If you think bureaucratic intimidation is going to work where missiles and fighter jets failed, you're seriously mistaken. Tank nodded in agreement. Captain Martinez and I have been through hell together. We're not about to cave into threats from people who weren't even there. Colonel Patterson looked increasingly uncomfortable as the confrontation escalated. As the base commander, he was caught between loyalty to his personnel and pressure from intelligence agencies whose power far exceeded his own. Captain Martinez, Chief Rodriguez, I'm ordering you to consider your positions very carefully. This is your last opportunity to accept the official account and move forward with your careers intact. Sarah stood up, her decision made. Sir, with respect, our careers were forfeit the moment we witnessed whatever was happening in that valley. The only question now is whether we're going to stand up for the truth or become part of the cover-up. Captain, you're dismissed. Report to quarters and consider your options. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning for your final decision. As Sarah and Tank left the debriefing room, they both knew that the real war had just begun. The aerial combat had been the easy part. Now they faced an enemy that operated in shadows and bureaucracy, using careers and lives as weapons in a game whose rules were written in classified documents they would never be allowed to see. But Sarah Martinez hadn't survived 18 months of combat by accepting defeat when the odds were against her. She had turned the tables on 2 F-16 fighters that morning, and now she was going to figure out how to turn the tables on whoever was behind the conspiracy that had nearly cost her and Tank their lives. The Apache pilot who had laughed as enemy aircraft fell from the sky was about to discover that some battles were fought on the ground, in offices and conference rooms where the weapons were words and documents rather than missiles and chain guns. But the principles remained the same. Know your enemy, use your strengths, and never give up until the mission is complete. The mission had just changed, but Sarah Martinez was far from finished. 6 months after the aerial engagement that changed everything, Captain Sarah Martinez stood in the witness chair of a congressional hearing room in Washington, D.C., her dress blue uniform bearing the ribbons and decorations of a distinguished combat pilot. The room was packed with reporters, military officials, and members of Congress, all waiting to hear her testimony about what the media had dubbed the Viper incident. The intervening months had been a nightmare of investigations, threats, reassignments, and legal battles. True to their word, Sarah and Tank had refused to sign false statements about the morning's events. Instead, they had used Tank's secretly preserved mission recorder data to build an unshakable case documenting everything that had happened during their confrontation with the F-16s. The road to this hearing room had been paved with danger and sacrifice. Shortly after their refusal to cooperate with the cover-up, both Sarah and Tank had been transferred to different bases under the pretext of routine reassignments. The clear intent was to separate them and make it harder to coordinate their stories. But the transfers had the opposite effect, drawing attention from military investigators who questioned why 2 highly decorated combat veterans were being shuffled around after a supposedly routine training accident. The break in the case came when Tank, using his extensive network of contacts among enlisted personnel, discovered that the original convoy they had been ordered to observe was carrying weapons to Taliban forces as part of a complex arms-dealing operation involving corrupt American contractors and Afghan government officials. The F-16 pilots had been ordered to eliminate Sarah, and Tank to prevent them from reporting what they had witnessed. Major Jake Wilson, faced with the choice between federal prison for attempted murder or cooperation with military investigators, had eventually revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. His testimony, combined with the mission recorder data and corroborating evidence from other sources, had blown open a scandal that reached to the highest levels of the military and defense contractor hierarchy. "Captain Martinez," said Congressman James Bradley, the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, "in your own words, please tell this committee what happened on the morning of March 15th during what was officially reported as a training exercise." Sarah looked directly at the congressional panel, her voice clear and confident as she began to speak. The same calm that had carried her through aerial combat now served her in this very different but equally important battle. "Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, what happened that morning was not a training exercise. It was an attempted assassination carried out by American fighter pilots who had been ordered to eliminate my weapons systems officer and myself to prevent us from reporting on illegal weapons trafficking operations." A murmur rippled through the hearing room as Sarah's words confirmed what the leaked reports had already suggested. This was the first time she had publicly testified about the events, and her direct, uncompromising account sent shockwaves through the audience. "Captain Martinez, that's an extremely serious allegation. Are you stating under oath that American military personnel attempted to murder you?" "Yes, sir. Major Jake Wilson and Captain Tommy Stevens, flying F-16 Fighting Falcons, deliberately engaged my Apache helicopter with live missiles and cannon fire after I observed a weapons convoy that was supposed to be protected from military interference." Congressman Bradley consulted his notes before continuing. "According to your testimony and supporting evidence, you successfully defended yourself against these attacks, ultimately shooting down both F-16s with your Apache's 30 chain gun. Is that correct? Yes, sir. The Apache helicopter, when properly employed by a skilled crew, is far more capable in certain combat situations than most people realize. A slight smile crossed Sarah's face as she remembered the expression of shock on Major Wilson's face when his supposedly easy target had turned the tables on him. The media had latched onto the story of a single helicopter defeating two advanced fighter jets, turning Sarah into a reluctant folk hero and symbol of individual competence triumphing over institutional corruption. Captain Martinez, after the engagement, you and Chief Rodriguez were pressured to accept a false version of events that would have covered up the illegal activities you had witnessed. Why did you refuse to cooperate? Mr. Chairman, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. When American military personnel are ordered to commit murder to protect criminal activities, that oath requires action, not silence. The hearing room erupted in applause, causing Chairman Bradley to call for order. Sarah's words had perfectly captured the moral clarity that had made her a hero to the American public and a nightmare for the officials who had orchestrated the cover-up attempt. Captain, what was your assessment of the threat you faced from the intelligence operatives who attempted to coerce your cooperation? Sir, Agent Davidson and Agent Miller made it clear that refusing to cooperate would result in serious consequences for my career and potentially my personal safety. They were correct about my career. I've been effectively blacklisted from flight operations since refusing to sign their false statements. As for my personal safety, there have been several incidents that suggest ongoing threats. Sarah's understated description didn't capture the full extent of what she and Tank had endured. There had been break-ins at their quarters, suspicious vehicle accidents, and anonymous threats that made it clear their lives remained in danger as long as they continued to pursue the truth. Congressman Maria Gonzalez, the ranking minority member of the committee, leaned forward to ask the next question. Captain Martinez, you've been hailed as a hero by the media and the public, but you've paid a significant personal price for your integrity. Do you regret your decision to stand up for the truth? No, ma'am. The only thing I regret is that it took so long for the truth to come out. There are good people throughout the military who deserve to serve in an institution that lives up to its highest ideals, not one that protects criminal activities. What would you say to young people considering military service who might be concerned about the corruption you've exposed? Sarah paused, considering her answer carefully. This was her opportunity to address not just the committee, but the millions of Americans who would see her testimony on television and social media. Ma'am, I would tell them that the military is made up of individuals, and every individual has a choice to make when confronted with wrongdoing. You can be part of the problem or part of the solution. The vast majority of the men and women I've served with are honorable people who would make the right choice when tested. The corruption we've exposed existed because too many people chose silence over courage. Congressman Bradley asked the question that everyone in the room wanted answered. Captain Martinez, in light of everything that has happened, what do you see as your future in the military? Mr. Chairman, I love flying and I love serving my country, but I've been effectively grounded since this incident began. The Army has made it clear that my career is over. However, I've received offers from civilian law enforcement agencies that are interested in my skills as a pilot and my experience in dealing with corruption. Sarah didn't mention that she had also received offers from private military contractors, media companies, and even Hollywood studios interested in her story. The attention was flattering, but also uncomfortable for someone who had always preferred to let her actions speak louder than her words. Captain, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with this committee? Sarah stood up straight, her bearing reflecting the pride and professionalism that had defined her military career. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I want to thank you for the opportunity to tell this story publicly. For too long, it was hidden behind classified documents and false reports. The truth matters, especially when lives are at stake. Chief Rodriguez and I survived because we were skilled, lucky, and determined to defend ourselves. But there may have been others who weren't so fortunate, others who were silenced before they could expose the corruption we've revealed. What we've uncovered is just the tip of the iceberg. There are networks of corruption that extend throughout the defense establishment, protected by people who believe that secrecy justifies any action, no matter how illegal or immoral. As long as those networks exist, American service members and innocent civilians will continue to be at risk. I hope this committee will continue investigating and hold accountable everyone who was involved in these criminal activities. The men and women of our armed forces deserve leaders who are worthy of their sacrifice and service. As Sarah concluded her testimony, the hearing room erupted in sustained applause. Chairman Bradley made no attempt to quiet the crowd, allowing the ovation to continue for several minutes as Sarah maintained her military bearing, looking straight ahead with the same calm confidence she had displayed in aerial combat. When the hearing finally adjourned, Sarah was surrounded by reporters, congressional staff members, and supporters who wanted to shake her hand or get a photograph with the woman who had become known as the Viper. But through the crowd, she spotted the person she most wanted to see: Chief Warrant Officer Marcus Rodriguez, dressed in his own dress blue uniform and wearing a smile that conveyed both pride and relief. "Tank, how did it feel watching from the gallery?" "Like watching you fly the Apache, Sarah, smooth, professional, and deadly accurate. You hit every target." As they walked together through the corridors of the Capitol building, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them from a canyon in Afghanistan to the halls of Congress. The aerial engagement had lasted only minutes, but the battle for truth had taken months and cost them both their military careers. "Any regrets, Tank?" "Only that we can't go back and do it again. Those F-16 pilots never knew what hit them." Sarah's laugh echoed through the marble corridor, the same clear, confident sound that had echoed over the radio channels 6 months earlier as 2 fighter jets fell from the Afghan sky. It was the laugh of someone who had faced overwhelming odds and emerged victorious, not through superior firepower or technology, but through skill, courage, and an unshakable commitment to doing what was right. 6 months later, Sarah Martinez received the Congressional Gold Medal in recognition of her exceptional courage in exposing corruption and defending the integrity of the United States military. Chief Warrant Officer Marcus Rodriguez received the same honor, standing beside her as they had stood together in the cockpit of an Apache helicopter when their integrity was tested under fire. The ceremony took place on the steps of the Capitol, with thousands of active-duty service members, veterans, and civilians in attendance. When Sarah was asked to speak, she kept her remarks brief and focused on the future rather than the past. "This medal represents not just what Chief Rodriguez and I did, but what any American service member would do when faced with the choice between right and wrong. We were trained to defend our country against all enemies, and sometimes that means standing up to enemies who wear the same uniform we do. The real heroes are the investigators, prosecutors, and congressional representatives who took our testimony and turned it into action. They're the ones who ensured that the truth came out and that justice was served." As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Sarah looked up at the dome of the Capitol and thought about the long journey from an Apache cockpit in Afghanistan to this moment of recognition and vindication. The girl who had dreamed of flying had become a pilot. The pilot who had mastered her aircraft had become a warrior. The warrior who had faced corruption had become a symbol of integrity. And the woman who had laughed as enemy aircraft fell from the sky had learned that some victories echo far beyond the battlefield, inspiring others to stand up for what's right even when the odds seem impossible. Sarah Viper Martinez had proven that sometimes one person with the courage to tell the truth could change everything. Her laughter had echoed across Afghan mountains and through congressional hearing rooms, carrying a message that would inspire a generation of service members to choose courage over convenience, truth over safety, and integrity over career advancement. The Apache pilot who had turned the tables on corruption and conspiracy had shown the world that sometimes the most important battles are fought not in the sky, but in the conscience of individuals who refuse to stay silent when silence serves evil. Her legacy would live on in every pilot who chose to stand up rather than stand down, every service member who put principle before personal interest, and every American who remembered that freedom requires eternal vigilance against those who would corrupt it from within.